I'm at the Bangalore LitFest to promote my latest book, which is the 12th book called Talking Cinema. It is published by Harper & Collins. The book essentially talks about the craft of acting and of filmmaking. It is divided into 4 sections. The first is called The Actor Prepares, where actors are talking about how they prepare for a role mentally, emotionally or physically. The second section is called Director's Cut, where the directors are talking about how they conceive a concept and from concept to execution see the journey. The third is called Character Speak, where actors are speaking about specific characters that are special to them and how they worked on it. For instance, some of them have role modeled it on a certain living personality and how they adapted the body language or how they worked on the costume. The last section is called the specialists. Much as we say that the actors are prolific or the directors are prolific, they get typecast into one particular image. So in this book, for instance, Amitabh Bachchan in his career has done 16 to 17 roles as a police inspector, or Rekha has done more than 10 roles as a courtesan, and Yash Chopra always makes films about romance, and Shyam Benegal always talks about the underdog, the oppressed in his movies. So the interviews concentrate on this specific subject and the actors talk about the highs and lows of doing a kind of a character. I did this book because as a journalist who's been writing about cinema for over 30 years, I felt a lot of literature is floating around on their personal lives, but very seldom do we have books which talks about their obsession for their craft. We have many books of this kind in Hollywood and abroad, and I think this is the first of its kind, and I feel privileged that Harper's has released the book. In the actor prepares section, there is Anil Kapoor, Madhuri Dixit, Shah Rukh Khan, Amitabh Bachchan, Shabana Azmi, Tabu. In the character speak, there is Jaya Bachchan, there is Rekha, there is and in the director section there is all genre and all generation of filmmakers, be it Rishikesh Mukherjee, Gulzar, Vishal Bhardwaj, Shekhar Kapoor, Mani Ratnam, Sanjay Leela Bhansali, Karan Johar. It is like a master's class, yes, because I felt that whenever we watch a film and there is a fantastic scene, you are always thinking about what was going on in his head when he did that scene. So I'm asking questions which are very specific related to the craft. I have an interesting observation about actors and filmmakers. Normally they agree to a conversation about their work, but in the process of talking about their craft, there is a magical moment that happens because when they realize that the questions are good enough for them to start going back into time, they start enjoying the moment so much because this is the first time they are reliving that moment and they enjoy it so much that it's like a magnificent obsession. And that's why the interviews become so much more interesting. I realized that whether they are mainstream actors or parallel cinema actors, whether they are today senior actors or budding actors, they all feel so passionately about their craft. And when you feel passionately about your craft, you don't want to make mistakes. And when you don't want to make mistakes, you are psychologically wanting to bid for more time because you think that by preparing more, you're going to deliver better. So there are certain instances which are so common in all of them. For instance, Shabana Azmi says that every time she has to create a new character, she gets into withdrawal symptoms and starts fantasizing that the shooting is going to get delayed. Amitabh Bachchan says that he dreams of running away from the makeup room before he has to do a difficult scene. Madhuri Dixit says that she consciously does not think of the character. Ajay Devgan says that the only way for him to get into another character is to switch off. And Rani Mukherjee says that the only way she can ever relax after a difficult film is by watching another film. But the gist comes from, of course, the master technician or the master actor, which is Mr. Bachchan, and he says that when you stand in front of the camera and the director is behind the camera, you know what scene is taking place, you know your dialogue, the director knows it, and then you hear the word start sound. And he says, you just go blank because it's a completely different world, and what finally you perform is got nothing to do with what you had imagined you are going to perform. And why this magical moment happens time after time is a mystery that nobody has been able to resolve, not the best filmmaker, not the best writer, and definitely not the best actor. I think the magic is a universal, natural truth, which is why when poets like Gulzar Saab or Javed Akhtar or Kaifi Saab or Majroo or even Ghalib, whenever they recite a couplet or write a couplet, they say, वो शेर हो गया, आप create नहीं करते हो, वो हो जाता है. The magical moments on celluloid just happen. You can't create them, you cannot plan them. Similarly, this book was not planned, it just happened. Yes, for instance, Rishikesh Mukherjee says that every time he would be doing a scene with the actor is such a restless species that they are never satisfied and they would always insist on another take. And Rishida would say to the actor that either you convince me that you can do better and why, or I convince you. And most of the time Rishikesh Mukherjee would convince the actor that he had got what he wanted, so he didn't want it. For instance, Karan Johar spoke about the kind of box office expectations from his films. He says when he was shooting for Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, and because he had 6 top stars, the expectations were so high that had the film not delivered, he would have probably died of a heart attack. Sanjay Leela Bhansali is a very passionate maker, speaker. He speaks through colors, through songs and music, and he says that every time when the shooting gets over and his set has to be demolished, he goes into a severe clinical depression. And when he sits alone on the sets and he feels every wall and every surface, every carpet and every chandelier, and he says, I feel as if they are chopping my fingers when they come and break my set. I built it with so much love. I want to delay it as much as I can. And he's also spoken about the making of Devdas, that how there came a time there was no money in the petty cash. And he said that my assistants would hide it from me that there was no money to even do that day's shooting. But he said, here I was like a spoiled brat asking for that certain fiber, fabric that should be floating in the background of a curtain. He said, I wanted a particular curtain. And he said, I would cry like a baby till I got that fabric, and I don't know from where my ADs got it. Some of them got it from home. And he said, you don't require money to make a film, you require passion. I feel very privileged to have these kind of intense, intimate, stimulating conversations with these artists, and I feel my life as a professional and as a person is enriched, and I owe my sensitivity to them. It's a special book for me and for anybody who cares for cinema. They say, Rani Mukherjee says that she's a spontaneous actor, and if they do too many retakes, she says, I start dimming. Amitabh Bachchan says that he deliberately does not give it in the rehearsal. He holds it back because he wants to give the best in the take. Shabana Azmi says that she comes from the FTII, so she's a method actor. And she says, I have to think it through. If I've not thought it through, I cannot do it. They all speak on varied factors. So, for instance, I asked some of them that how do they create the character? okay, it's there in the script. And Bachchan gave me an instance of Sarkar, that how he was in the vanity van, the hair guy came and fixed the wig, the costume brought his lungi or dhoti, the makeup man put the tilak, and he said they put the spectacles on his head, eyes, and he said, I stepped out of my vanity van and there were these studio hands who were sitting there, and they just sprang to the feet in part reverence and part fear. And he said, I did not smile, I just walked rolling the sleeves of my silk kurta. And by the time I reached the set, I had decided that if I can have that effect on them, then I'm going to roll the sleeves. So it's so interesting because you cannot plan a conversation, you cannot plan what you're going to talk. It is what they give me the fodder and what I give them the fodder, and you make it. And such a book cannot happen without a foundation of trust. And for that I feel privileged. I don't think a good film or a good performance can happen without a good team. Everything has to fall into place. The filmmaker, his team of assistants, writer, cameraman, actor, editor, everybody is important. Nobody is less important than the other. It is just that it is the director's vision, and that is why it is called the director's medium, and it is because he is the father of the film. So whenever any of the child has a problem, they are expecting the father to have a solution, and he does.